Thanks for staying with Newsnight. Inequality is continuing to grow. An Oxfam report has found the economy continues to favor the wealthy while the poor become more destitute. Black African women are said to be the most affected. The report comes on the eve of the annual World Economic Forum held in Davos. For more on this, we're joined by Noxolo Mfocwa from Oxfam South Africa. Good evening, Noxolo. Thanks very much for coming through. Do we know why Black African women are most affected?
Thank you so much for having me, Rio. The main issue is the distribution of wealth. So what happens is that in the last year or so in South Africa, we've moved from having about 8 billionaires to having 5. And within those 5, the wealth hasn't trickled down. So when the wealth doesn't trickle down, no money is invested, not enough money is invested in education and health, for instance, and that lessens opportunities for black women in particular. We live in a country where black women, almost 50% of black women in this country are living in poverty, whereas when you compare that to white women, there's only 0.4% of them living in poverty. So it's a matter of black women not having access to education to help mitigate the burden of poverty on them. It's about black women having to fill the gaps of our health system when it fails, because it is black women in majority that take care of their families through unpaid care work. When the health system is failing, they have to sit with people at home when they're sick. When there's no money and people are not getting proper incomes, girl children are the first ones to be taken out of school, and that has had a very big effect in how black women live in inequality and in advert poverty in the country.
Now, you're suggesting that governments should ensure that, and I quote, the richest people and corporations are fairly taxed. Is it your sense or feeling that they are not taxed enough?
Well, here's the thing. As things currently are in South Africa, corporates and people who are very wealthy in this country are not being taxed enough. People in this country are able to evade taxes. The ones with the most money are able to take their money out of the country and hide it in safe havens in different places in the world. And this is not being regulated. It's very easy for SARS to go after individuals who are not even making half the money that these billionaires are making, but they're not doing enough to collect the revenue that should be collected from corporates and from very wealthy people in this country.
Well, I've had people arguing that is not really the problem. Yes, there may be people who get involved in all sorts of ways of evading, paying their taxes, but for most, they are actually paying their taxes. In fact, some believe they are being overtaxed. But the problem in South Africa is that you have a small pool of people from who government can actually get taxes.
Well, that's a shaky argument in the sense that we live in a country where our government would rather raise the VAT than actually go for a corporate income tax. If you look at stats, in 1990, people were paying about 40 to 50% of corporate income tax and also like wealth tax in the apartheid government. At this moment, it's at less than 30%. So that means they're actually being taxed less on the matter of being taxed more than everyone. And maybe we should start thinking about who we view as a taxpayer in this country, because currently the person who's a working class person is paying more taxes than people who have the money. They're not being taxed fairly. It's not saying that there's certain people that must be taxed and others mustn't. But the point is, black people in particular in this country, black women in particular, are being taxed more money than wealthy people. Wealthy people are not paying their fair share of taxes, and this is affecting how much money can be invested in social services like education, universalized healthcare, and other social services that should be funded by the government. And for people to try and argue that when the stats are there saying that you're paying less and you're going to come and say and try to argue that you're paying more than other people, they're just not paying their fair share, and that should
But is it not a question also of perhaps bad decisions by the government? Look at the reasons why government had to increase VAT. It was because of bad things that happened, and now it couldn't raise the amount of money that it thought it would raise. And the only way to deal with that, they felt, was by increasing VAT. And then you have other people pointing at corruption. Look at the stuff that's coming out of the State Capture Commission. Imagine if those monies had gone to the right places, to health, to education, to welfare, instead of, going to rich people who are only enriching themselves, and that money never really going where it's supposed to go. Is there no argument or case to be made?
In the matter of corruption, we need to understand that inequality on its own, it makes inequality, corruption worse, So, for instance, with state capture, we have seen private entities and the private sector basically having money that's enough and influence that's enough for them to influence government decisions on policy and who gets what contracts and what tenders, And so what I can say and what I can argue about this matter of corruption is that corruption and inequality work together, and they work together against the poor, right? And so we can't actually argue that corruption is only a state thing. It's definitely the private sector is together with the state in doing that. And the private sector is using the money that they have and the influence that they have to influence policy decisions that the government is making that could be benefiting the people but are not. So we can't actually be like, no, if we give the money to the government, then it's all going to disappear in corruption. Everyone is corrupt, the private sector and the state, and they're colluding against the public of this country.
Okay, that's all we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Noxolo Mfocwa from Oxfam. There's a report that was released today. Look, it's called the Global Inequality Report on Public Good versus Private Wealth. And from what they have found, inequality is affecting Black African women more than it affects anybody else.